My sister claimed our inheritance, and in the lawyer's office, the hospice nurse appeared and asked, "May I share what your mother actually said before she died?" The hospice nurse walked into Charles Whitfield's law office at exactly 2:34 p.m. on a Thursday in November, and I watched my sister's face drain of color so fast I thought she might faint. We'd been sitting there for 23 minutes, listening to Vanessa explain why she deserved our mother's entire estate, worth approximately $1.2 million, while I got nothing. The nurse, a woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, stopped just inside the doorway, her hospital ID badge still clipped to her cardigan. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "I apologize for interrupting, but may I share what Mrs. Eleanor Brennan actually said before she died? Because what I'm hearing in this room right now is not what happened in that hospice room 3 weeks ago. My name is Andrew Brennan. I'm 34 years old, work as a high school history teacher in Portland, and until 6 weeks ago, I had a mother who I thought loved both her children equally. Mom died on October 8th at 3:17 a.m. in a hospice facility in southeast Portland after a 9-month battle with pancreatic cancer. I'd been there, holding her hand, reading to her from her favorite book when she took her last breath. Vanessa, my older sister by 4 years, had been there too, standing on the other side of the bed, crying dramatically into a tissue. We'd both been devastated, or so I thought. The funeral was on October 12th, a small service at the church Mom had attended for 30 years. Vanessa gave a eulogy that made everyone cry, talking about what an amazing mother we'd had, how much she'd sacrificed for us, how her final days had been filled with love and peace. I'd believed every word. The first sign something was wrong came on October 15th when I received a call from Charles Whitfield, our mother's estate attorney. He'd asked me to come to his office for a reading of the will. I'd assumed it would be straightforward, probably a 50-50 split of Mom's assets, maybe some specific items designated for each of us. Mom had been a high school English teacher for 38 years before retiring, and she'd been careful with money, invested wisely, paid off her house. She wasn't wealthy, but she was comfortable. The $1.2 million estate included her house, worth about $650,000 in Portland's inflated market, her retirement accounts totaling roughly $420,000, savings and investments of about $95,000, and her life insurance policy of $50,000. When I walked into Whitfield's office that Thursday, Vanessa was already there, sitting in one of the leather chairs across from his massive oak desk. She smiled at me, but it was different from her normal smile. Sharper, more satisfied. "Andy, hi. Thanks for coming." She'd never called me Andy, always Andrew. That should have been my first clue. Charles Whitfield was 61 years old, had been practicing estate law for 34 years, and had known our mother for over a decade. He was a careful man with precise movements and a calm demeanor that probably served him well in his profession. "Mr. Brennan, thank you for coming. Please, sit down." I sat. Whitfield opened a file folder and pulled out several documents. "I'll be direct. Your mother's will, which was updated on September 24th, 2 weeks before her passing, leaves the entirety of her estate to Vanessa Brennan. You, Andrew, are not named as a beneficiary." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What? That can't be right." Vanessa reached over and touched my arm, her expression perfectly calibrated to show sympathy. "Andrew, I'm so sorry. I didn't want to tell you like this. Mom and I talked about it extensively in her final weeks. She felt that since I'd been her primary caregiver, since I'd put my career on hold to take care of her, it was only fair that I receive the estate." I stared at her. "Primary caregiver? Vanessa? We both took care of her. I was there every single day after school. I spent every weekend at her house. I took a leave of absence from work for the last month of her life." Whitfield cleared his throat. "According to the will and the supporting documentation your sister provided, Ms. Brennan moved in with your mother in January to provide round-the-clock care. She claims she left her job as a marketing director to be available full-time." "That's not true," I said, my voice rising despite my attempt to stay calm. "Vanessa visited maybe once a week. She was still working. She didn't move in with Mom until the last 2 weeks, and that was only because I begged her to help more." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. Perfect, glistening tears that didn't quite fall. "Andrew, I understand you're upset, but this is what Mom wanted. She told me herself. She said she wanted to take care of the daughter who'd taken care of her." "When did she say this?" I demanded. "When exactly did this conversation happen?" "Multiple times," Vanessa said smoothly. "During her final weeks. She was very clear about her wishes." Whitfield interjected. "Mr. Brennan, I understand this is difficult, but the will is legally binding. It was witnessed, notarized, and filed properly. Unless you have evidence of undue influence or mental incapacity at the time of signing, there's no legal recourse." My hands were shaking. I pressed them against my thighs to keep them still. "Mr. Whitfield, my mother was diagnosed in January. She started chemo in February. By September, she was exhausted, in pain, on heavy medication. How can we be sure she was of sound mind when she signed this?" "I personally met with her," Whitfield said. "On September 24th at 10 a.m., in her home. She was lucid, coherent, and adamant about her wishes. Vanessa was present at her request. Your mother specifically told me that Vanessa had sacrificed her career and her personal life to provide care, and she wanted to ensure Vanessa was provided for. I looked at Vanessa. She met my gaze with perfect composure, just a hint of sadness in her eyes. She was good. She'd always been good at manipulation, at playing the victim or the hero depending on what the situation required. But I'd never seen her do it at this level, never imagined she'd weaponize our dying mother. I want to contest the will, I said. Whitfield sighed. That's your right, of course. But I should warn you, will contests are expensive, time-consuming, and rarely successful when the will is this well-documented and properly executed. I don't care about the money, I said, which wasn't entirely true but felt true in that moment. I care about the truth. My mother loved me. She wouldn't have cut me out completely. Something's wrong here. Vanessa stood up. Andrew, please, don't do this. Don't drag Mom's memory through a legal battle. She made her choice. She wanted me to have the estate because I earned it. Accept it and move on. Move on? I stood too, my chair scraping back against the hardwood floor. Move on from the fact that my mother allegedly decided I was worth nothing? That 34 years of being her son meant nothing compared to a few months of caregiving that I'm not even sure happened the way you're claiming? Vanessa's face hardened for just a second, a flash of something cold and calculating, before softening again. I'm sorry you feel that way. Mr. Whitfield, unless Andrew has any legal grounds to contest, I'd like to move forward with the estate settlement. Whitfield looked at me. Mr. Brennan, do you have any evidence that would support a contest? Any documentation, witnesses, or proof of undue influence? Not yet, I admitted, but I'll find it. I left that office at 3:08 p.m., got in my Toyota Camry, drove 3 blocks, and had to pull over because my hands were shaking too badly to drive safely. I sat there in a grocery store parking lot, trying to process what had just happened. My mother, who'd taught me to read, who'd come to every parent-teacher conference even when she was the teacher, who'd called me twice a week just to talk, who'd held my hand as she died, had apparently decided I deserved nothing. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. But Vanessa's performance had been flawless, and Whitfield seemed convinced. I needed help. I called David Thornton, a lawyer I'd met through a friend, who specialized in estate litigation. He was 49, had been practicing for 22 years, and had a reputation for being both thorough and aggressive. Andrew, slow down. Tell me exactly what happened. I explained everything. The will, Vanessa's claims, Whitfield's conviction, the September 24th signing. When I finished, David was quiet for a moment. Okay, here's what we're looking at. To successfully contest a will in Oregon, you need to prove either lack of testamentary capacity, meaning your mother wasn't mentally competent, or undue influence, meaning someone coerced or manipulated her. Both are hard to prove. But it's possible? I asked. It's possible. We'll need medical records showing her mental state in late September. We'll need witnesses who can testify to her relationship with you, her normal behavior, any changes they noticed. We'll need documentation of Vanessa's actual level of caregiving versus what she claims, and we'll need to move fast because the longer the estate sits in probate, the harder it becomes. How fast? I'll file a contest within the week. We'll request all medical records, financial records, any communications between your mother and sister. We'll depose everyone involved. But Andrew, I need to be honest with you. This will cost money. Legal fees for estate litigation can run anywhere from $20,000 to $100,000, depending on how hard your sister fights. I thought about my teacher's salary, my modest savings account with maybe $12,000 in it. I'll find the money. Good. Come to my office tomorrow at 9 a.m. Bring everything you have, photos, emails, text messages with your mom, anything that shows your relationship with her. I spent that night going through my phone, my email, my photo albums. I had hundreds of pictures of Mom and me. Birthday dinners, holiday celebrations, random weekend visits. I had text message chains going back years. I had emails where she'd send me articles she thought I'd find interesting for my classes, where she'd ask about my students, where she'd tell me she loved me. I had voicemails saved on my phone from her last few months, one from August, where she'd called to tell me she was proud of me for how I'd handled a difficult student situation. One from September 15th, just 9 days before she allegedly signed that will, where she'd said, Andrew, honey, I know I don't say it enough, but you've been my rock through all of this. I couldn't have made it this far without you. I love you so much. I played that voicemail 3 times, crying in my dark living room, trying to reconcile that voice with a woman who would cut me out of her will completely. It didn't fit. The next morning, I met with David Thornton. His office was in downtown Portland, a modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River. He reviewed everything I'd brought, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. This is good, he said. This shows an ongoing, loving relationship. But we need more. We need to prove Vanessa's claims are false. How? Witness testimony. Who else was around during your mother's final months, I thought. The hospice staff. They were there constantly once Mom transitioned to home hospice in mid-September. There were nurses, aides, social workers. They saw everything. David nodded. Perfect. Hospice workers are often the best witnesses in cases like this because they're trained observers and they document everything. I'll subpoena their records and depositions. He made a note. Anyone else? Mom's friends from church, her book club, her former colleagues from the high school where she taught. Good. I'll start reaching out. In the meantime, I'm filing the contest today. That'll freeze the estate and force Vanessa to respond. The contest was filed on October 18th at 2:15 p.m. Vanessa's response came through her own attorney, Leslie Grayson, a 53-year-old estate lawyer with a reputation for aggressive defense. The response, filed on October 25th, was brutal. It claimed I was a disgruntled son who'd neglected his mother in her final months, that I was financially motivated, that I was attempting to overturn a clearly expressed wish because I couldn't accept the consequences of my own absence. It included affidavits from Vanessa claiming she'd been present for every doctor's appointment, every chemo session, every difficult night. It was all lies, but they were documented lies, signed and notarized. David and I spent the next 3 weeks building our case. We subpoenaed medical records from Mom's oncologist, Dr. Linda Casper, 46 years old, 18 years in oncology practice. The records showed appointments from January through September. I'd been listed as the emergency contact until September 20th when it was changed to Vanessa. Dr. Casper's notes showed I'd attended 12 of the 14 appointments. Vanessa had attended 3. We subpoenaed pharmacy records showing who picked up Mom's medications. I'd picked up 32 prescriptions. Vanessa had picked up 4. We collected testimony from neighbors who confirmed I'd been at Mom's house daily while Vanessa visited sporadically. But Vanessa's lawyer countered with financial records showing Vanessa had paid for home health aides, had covered medical bills, had made significant financial contributions to Mom's care. Money I'd known nothing about. Where did she get this money? I asked David. She was always broke, always complaining about her credit card debt. I don't know, David admitted. But if she did spend this money, it strengthens her claim that she was the primary caregiver. Something felt wrong about those financial records, but I couldn't prove it. The deposition of Charles Whitfield happened on November 8th in a conference room at his law firm. He testified, under oath, that Eleanor Brennan had been completely lucid on September 24th when she signed the will, that she'd specifically requested the meeting, that she'd told him in clear terms she wanted Vanessa to inherit everything because of the sacrifices Vanessa had made. Did she mention Andrew at all? David asked. Yes, Whitfield said. She said Andrew was a good son, but that he had his career, his own life. She said Vanessa had given up everything to care for her and deserved to be compensated. Those were her exact words? Deserved to be compensated? Yes. David made a note. And Vanessa was present during this meeting? Yes, at Mrs. Brennan's request. Did you find it unusual that the beneficiary was present when the will was being signed? Whitfield shifted in his seat. It's not uncommon in cases where adult children are involved in caregiving. Mrs. Brennan wanted Vanessa there for support. The deposition of Dr. Linda Casper happened on November 12th. She brought Mom's complete medical file, every note, every test result, every observation from 9 months of treatment. In your professional opinion, David asked, was Eleanor Brennan mentally competent to make legal decisions on September 24th? Dr. Casper reviewed her notes from that week. Mom had been in the hospital September 21st through 23rd for complications from her latest round of chemo. She'd been released on the 23rd with increased pain medication. Her cognitive function was declining in late September, Dr. Casper said carefully. The cancer had metastasized to her liver, and there was some concern about hepatic encephalopathy, which can cause confusion. On September 24th, she would have been on significant doses of oxycodone and lorazepam for pain and anxiety management. Would those medications affect her judgment? They can. They're known to cause confusion, drowsiness, and impaired decision-making, especially in elderly patients or those with compromised liver function. Vanessa's lawyer, Leslie Grayson, jumped in. But doctor, you never declared her incompetent, did you? You never filed any paperwork suggesting she couldn't make her own decisions? No, Dr. Casper admitted. She had moments of clarity, but those moments were becoming less frequent. It wasn't enough. We needed more. On November 15th, David received the hospice records. Home hospice had been initiated on September 16th when it became clear Mom's cancer was terminal and treatment was no longer effective. The hospice team included a primary nurse, rotating night nurses, a social worker, and a chaplain. The primary nurse was Catherine Walsh, 48 years old, 23 years in hospice care. Her notes were detailed, almost obsessive. She documented every visit, every medication administration, every conversation, every person who came and went from Mom's house. I met with David on November 16th to review the records. This is incredible, David said, reading through Catherine Walsh's notes. She documented everything. The notes showed a clear pattern. From September 16th through September 30th, I was listed as present for every single nurse visit. Vanessa was listed as present for 6 visits out of 43. The notes included observations like Andrew very attentive, asking appropriate questions about comfort care, and patient's son Andrew holding her hand, reading to her, and Andrew administered morning medications under supervision, demonstrating excellent care technique. There were only 2 notes mentioning Vanessa. Patient's daughter visited 2 to 3:30 p.m., patient slept most of visit, and daughter Vanessa called to ask about mother's status, did not visit. This completely contradicts Vanessa's claims, I said. She wasn't there. The hospice records prove it. David smiled. This is exactly what we need. But there's more. He pulled out notes from September 24th, the day Mom allegedly signed the will with complete mental clarity. Catherine Walsh's note from her 11 a.m. visit read, "Patient very confused today, asking for her deceased husband, unable to recall what year it is, increased agitation, contacted physician about possible medication adjustment, patient's son Andrew present and concerned, provided education about end-of-life confusion and delirium." She was confused that day, I said. Whitfield said she was lucid at 10 a.m., but by 11 a.m. she didn't know what year it was. Which means either Whitfield is lying about the time or your mother's lucidity was fluctuating rapidly, David said. Either way, it supports our argument that she wasn't capable of making a major legal decision. We scheduled a deposition with Catherine Walsh for November 20th. She arrived at David's office looking tired but determined, carrying a thick binder of additional notes she'd kept beyond her official documentation. "I keep personal journals," she explained, settling into the chair across from David's desk. "Nothing that violates HIPAA, just observations and reflections that help me process the emotional aspects of this work. When I heard about the will contest, I reviewed my notes from Mrs. Brennan's case." "What did you find?" David asked. Catherine opened her binder. "I found that Vanessa Brennan's presence was minimal and, when she was present, often disruptive. I have a note from September 17th where Vanessa called me aside and asked how much longer her mother had. When I explained it was hard to predict but likely weeks rather than months, she said, and I quote, 'Good. I need to get this over with. I have things I need to handle.' My stomach turned. She said that? She did. I also have notes from September 22nd where Vanessa asked me detailed questions about your mother's mental state, specifically whether she was competent to sign legal documents. I told her that depended on the day and the time that her mother was having increasing periods of confusion." "What happened on September 24th? David asked. Catherine flipped through her notes. "I arrived at 11 a.m. for my scheduled visit. There was an unfamiliar car in the driveway. When I entered, I found Mrs. Brennan in her bedroom, extremely confused and agitated. Vanessa was there with a man I didn't recognize, who I later learned was the attorney, Charles Whitfield. They were leaving as I arrived. Vanessa seemed flustered and told me they'd just been visiting. Nothing important." "Did you speak with Mrs. Brennan about their visit?" "I tried. She was very confused. She kept asking where Andrew was, saying she needed to talk to Andrew, that something wasn't right. She became so agitated I had to administer an extra dose of lorazepam to calm her." Catherine's hands tightened on her binder. I documented all of this in my official notes, but what I didn't include was a conversation I had with Mrs. Brennan on September 29th, 5 days later. She had a moment of unusual clarity that evening. Andrew was there, reading to her. I came in to check her vitals, and she grabbed my hand. I leaned forward. "What did she say?" Catherine looked directly at me, and I saw tears in her eyes. She said, "Catherine, I need you to know something. Vanessa brought a man here. She told me to sign papers. She said they were medical papers, something about my care. But I don't remember what I signed. I was so confused. Did I do something wrong? I don't want to hurt Andrew. He's been so good to me." The room went silent. David spoke first. "She thought she was signing medical documents?" "That's what she told me. She was crying. She said Vanessa had told her the papers were necessary for her hospice care, that if she didn't sign them, her pain medication might be stopped. Mrs. Brennan was terrified of pain. She would have signed anything if she thought it meant continued access to pain relief." "What did you tell her?" I asked, my voice barely working. "I told her she didn't do anything wrong, that I'd look into it, that Andrew would make sure everything was okay." She seemed relieved. "Then she asked me to tell you something, Andrew." I couldn't breathe. "What?" Catherine pulled out a handwritten note from her binder. I wrote it down verbatim because I knew it was important. She said, "Tell Andrew I love him more than anything in this world. Tell him the house should be his. It was always meant to be his. Tell him I'm proud of the man he became, and tell him I'm sorry if I signed something bad. I was so confused." I put my head in my hands and wept. David let me cry for a minute, then gently asked Catherine, "Did you report this conversation to anyone?" I documented it in my personal notes. I called the hospice medical director the next day to express concerns about possible elder abuse, but Mrs. Brennan died on October 8th before anything could be investigated. After her death, I assumed Andrew would inherit and the issue would be resolved. When I heard about the will contest, I knew I needed to come forward. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" David asked. "I wasn't sure it was my place. I'm a nurse, not a lawyer. I didn't want to interfere in family business. But then, I kept thinking about Mrs. Brennan's face when she told me she was sorry, like she'd done something wrong. She didn't do anything wrong. She was manipulated." David scheduled a follow-up meeting with Charles Whitfield for November 23rd. Armed with Catherine Walsh's testimony, he demanded to know the exact timeline of the September 24th meeting. Under pressure and the threat of possible ethical violations, Whitfield reviewed his calendar and billing records. The meeting, he admitted, had actually occurred from 10:45 a.m. to 11:15 a.m., not at 10 a.m. as he'd originally stated. He'd rounded the time in his initial statement. Catherine Walsh's notes showed she'd arrived at 11 a.m. and found Mom already confused and agitated, which meant Whitfield had been there during Mom's confusion, not before it. David confronted him. Mr. Whitfield, did Vanessa Brennan tell you that her mother was having periods of confusion? Whitfield hesitated. She mentioned her mother's condition was declining. Did she tell you the best time to visit when her mother would be most lucid? She suggested the morning, yes. Did she specifically schedule this meeting for a time when her brother would be at work and unable to attend? Whitfield shifted uncomfortably. I don't recall the specifics of the scheduling. But David had phone records. Vanessa had called Whitfield on September 23rd at 8:42 p.m. and specifically requested a meeting for 10:45 a.m. the next day, emphasizing that her brother would be teaching and couldn't be there, that it needed to be just her and their mother. We had enough. David filed an emergency motion on November 27th, requesting an immediate hearing based on new evidence of fraud and undue influence. The hearing was scheduled for November 30th at 2 p.m. in Multnomah County Circuit Court, Judge Robert Thornton presiding. 59 years old, 31 years on the bench, known for being thorough and fair. Vanessa and her lawyer arrived looking confident. I sat next to David, my hands shaking despite my best efforts to stay calm. We'd subpoenaed Catherine Walsh to appear. She was waiting in the hallway outside the courtroom. Judge Thornton called the hearing to order at 2:04 p.m. David stood. Your Honor, we have compelling evidence that Eleanor Brennan was unduly influenced and possibly deceived into signing a will that contradicts her actual wishes and her lifetime pattern of behavior. Leslie Grayson, Vanessa's lawyer, objected. Your Honor, this is a desperate attempt by a disgruntled son who can't accept his mother's clearly stated wishes. The will was properly executed, witnessed, and notarized. Let's hear the evidence, Judge Thornton said. David called Catherine Walsh to testify. She was sworn in and took the stand. For 45 minutes, she walked through her notes, her observations, her documentation of who was present during Mom's final weeks. She described Mom's declining mental state, the fluctuating lucidity, the periods of confusion. She described the September 24th visit when she'd arrived to find Whitfield and Vanessa leaving, and Mom agitated and confused. Then David asked the critical question. Ms. Walsh, did Mrs. Brennan ever express her wishes about her estate to you? Yes. On September 29th, she had a moment of clarity. She specifically told me the house should go to Andrew, that it was always meant to be his. Did she say anything else? Catherine looked at me, then at Vanessa. She said she was sorry if she'd signed something bad, that Vanessa had told her the papers were medical documents related to her hospice care. Vanessa's face went white. Leslie Grayson stood up. Objection. This is hearsay. It's a statement by the decedent about her own intentions, David countered. It falls under the state of mind exception to the hearsay rule. Judge Thornton nodded. I'll allow it. Continue. Catherine pulled out her personal journal and read Mom's exact words. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Then the courtroom door opened. Everyone turned. Catherine Walsh, still on the witness stand, looked toward the door, and her eyes widened slightly. That's her, she said. That's Bethany. A woman in her early 40s, wearing scrubs with a hospice facility logo, stepped inside. She had short dark hair and carried a folder. I'm sorry to interrupt, Your Honor, she said, her voice steady. My name is Bethany Carson. I was one of the night nurses caring for Mrs. Eleanor Brennan during her final weeks. I heard about this hearing from Catherine. May I share what Mrs. Brennan actually said before she died? Judge Thornton looked at David, then at Leslie Grayson. Does anyone object to hearing this testimony? Leslie looked at Vanessa, whose face had gone from white to gray. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. This witness wasn't on the witness list. Neither was the homeless man in a recent viral case I read about, Judge Thornton said dryly. But sometimes the truth finds its way into the courtroom anyway. I'll hear what she has to say. Miss Carson, please approach. Bethany walked to the witness stand. Catherine stepped down. Bethany was sworn in. Ms. Carson, Judge Thornton said, what is it you want to share? Bethany opened her folder. I worked the night shift caring for Mrs. Brennan from September 28th through October 7th. On October 6th, 2 days before she died, she had a period of unusual lucidity around 2 a.m. I documented it in my notes. She pulled out a form. Mrs. Brennan told me she was worried about her will. She said her daughter Vanessa had brought a lawyer to the house and had her sign papers. She said Vanessa told her the papers were just medical forms, but she wasn't sure. She was very agitated about it. What specifically did she say? David asked. Bethany read from her notes. She said, I think I made a terrible mistake. Vanessa said I was signing papers so my pain medication would continue, but something felt wrong. I need to talk to Andrew. Where is Andrew? I need Andrew to fix this. Then she said, Andrew has always taken care of me. Everything should go to Andrew. The house was always meant to be Andrew's. His father and I always said we'd leave it to him because he'd take care of it, make it a home like we did. I felt tears running down my face. Bethany continued. I told her Andrew would be there in the morning, that we'd make sure he knew everything. She seemed relieved. Then she said something else. What? Bethany looked directly at Vanessa. She said, Vanessa only comes when she wants something. She's always been that way, even as a child. I love her, but I don't trust her. Andrew is the one I trust. Andrew is the one who should have everything. Vanessa stood up. That's a lie. You're making this up. Judge Thornton's voice cracked like a whip. Sit down, Ms. Brennan. Vanessa sat, but her face was twisted with rage. Bethany pulled out another document. I also need to share something else. On the night of October 7th, Mrs. Brennan's last night, I was doing my final check at around 11 p.m. Vanessa came to visit, which was unusual because she rarely came at night. She asked me to leave the room, said she wanted privacy with her mother. I stepped out but stayed nearby in case Mrs. Brennan needed anything. What happened? I heard raised voices, not shouting, but intense. I moved closer to the door. I heard Vanessa say, You signed it, Mom. It's done. Stop trying to undo it. Andrew doesn't need your money. He has his teacher's salary. I need this. I deserve this. Mrs. Brennan was crying. She said, I didn't know what I was signing. You lied to me. I want Andrew. Vanessa said, Well, Andrew isn't here, and by the time he gets here tomorrow, it'll be too late for you to change anything. The courtroom was completely silent. Bethany's voice shook, but stayed steady. I should have intervened. I should have called someone. But I was afraid of overstepping. Mrs. Brennan died 6 hours later at 3:17 a.m. Andrew was there. He'd arrived at midnight after I called him to say his mother was declining rapidly, but Vanessa was gone by then. She left at 11:30 p.m. Judge Thornton looked at Vanessa with barely concealed disgust. Ms. Brennan, do you have anything to say? Vanessa's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, but Vanessa shook her off. She was confused. She didn't know what she was saying. I did everything for her. I gave up my job. I spent my savings on her care. Andrew was barely there. That's not true, I said, standing up. I was there every single day. David pulled me back down, but Judge Thornton held up his hand. Actually, Mr. Brennan, I'd like to hear from you. Tell me about your mother's final weeks. I took a breath. I took a leave of absence from teaching on September 1st. I was at her house every single morning by 7 a.m. I administered her medications, made her breakfast when she could eat, read to her, held her hand. I left only for a few hours in the afternoon when the hospice aides were there. I came back every evening and stayed until she fell asleep. On her last night, the hospice nurse called me at midnight and said I should come. I was there by 12:23 a.m. I held her hand until she died. And your sister? Vanessa came maybe once a week for an hour or two. She'd sit in the room, check her phone, and leave. The night before Mom died, I didn't even know Vanessa had been there. She never told me. When I arrived at midnight, Mom was unconscious, but she was agitated, restless. The nurse said she'd been that way since around 11 p.m. Judge Thornton turned to Leslie Grayson. Counselor, I'm going to give you one chance to withdraw this will defense before I make a ruling that will not only invalidate the will, but potentially expose your client to criminal charges for fraud and elder abuse. Leslie looked at Vanessa, who was shaking her head. Your Honor, my client maintains that the will represents her mother's true wishes. Very well, Judge Thornton said. He took off his glasses and set them on the bench. I've been a judge for 31 years. I've seen a lot of ugly family disputes, but this might be the most egregious example of manipulation and abuse I've witnessed. He looked at Vanessa. Ms. Brennan, you exploited your dying mother's confusion and fear of pain to trick her into signing a will that contradicted her lifetime intentions and her clearly expressed final wishes. You lied to the court about your level of caregiving. You attempted to defraud your brother out of his rightful inheritance. The will executed on September 24th is hereby declared null and void due to undue influence, fraud, and lack of testamentary capacity. The estate of Eleanor Brennan will be distributed according to her prior will, dated March 2019, which left everything equally to both children. Vanessa made a sound like a wounded animal. Furthermore, Judge Thornton continued, I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of possible elder abuse and fraud charges. Ms. Grayson, I strongly suggest you withdraw from this representation immediately. Leslie Grayson stood up, grabbed her briefcase, and walked out without another word. Vanessa sat alone at her table, shaking. Judge Thornton looked at me. Mr. Brennan, I'm sorry for your loss. Your mother clearly loved you very much. This court is adjourned. He stood and left through his chamber's door. I sat there, unable to move. David put his hand on my shoulder. It's over. You won. But I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt like I'd lost my mother twice, once to cancer, once to the truth about my sister. Bethany Carson approached me slowly. Mr. Brennan, I'm so sorry I didn't come forward sooner. I didn't realize the will situation until Catherine called me yesterday and told me what was happening. Why did you come? I asked. Because your mother deserved better, and because I've seen too many people die with unfinished business, with words unsaid. Your mother's last coherent words to me were, tell Andrew I love him. Tell him I'm proud of him. I needed you to hear that. Catherine Walsh joined us. We both did. Your mother was a wonderful woman. What Vanessa did to her was unconscionable. The investigation into Vanessa began the next week. Detective Richard Foster, 51 years old, 26 years with the Portland Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, interviewed everyone involved. The financial records Vanessa had submitted showing her payments for Mom's care turned out to be fabricated. The checks she claimed to have written had never been cashed. The home health aides she claimed to have paid for had never existed. She'd created fake invoices and bank statements. On December 14th, Vanessa was charged with 3 counts of fraud, 2 counts of elder abuse, and 1 count of forgery. She pleaded not guilty, but the evidence was overwhelming. Her trial was scheduled for March. In February, facing the testimony of Catherine Walsh, Bethany Carson, Dr. Linda Casper, and dozens of other witnesses, her public defender convinced her to accept a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of fraud and 1 count of elder abuse. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay $87,000 in restitution for my legal fees and court costs. The house, Mom's retirement accounts, everything was split equally between us as Mom's 2019 will had specified. But Vanessa's half would go directly to paying her restitution and legal fees. She'd get almost nothing. I moved into Mom's house in April. It felt right, being there, taking care of the garden she'd loved, sleeping in the house where I'd grown up. I found things she'd left for me, notes and books, a letter in her desk drawer dated September 15th that started, "Dear Andrew, if you're reading this, I'm gone." The letter explained everything, how much she loved me, how proud she was of me, how she wanted me to have the house, to fill it with my own family someday, to make it a home like she and Dad had. She wrote, "I know Vanessa will be difficult. She always has been. She's always wanted more than she earned. But don't let her take what's yours. This house, this life I built, it's meant for you. You were always the one who understood what mattered." I framed that letter and hung it in the hallway. 6 months after Judge Thornton's ruling, I got a letter from Bethany Carson. She'd left hospice work and was now teaching nursing students about ethics and patient advocacy, using Mom's case as an example of why vigilance matters, why speaking up matters. Catherine Walsh retired from hospice care in June. She sent me a card saying she couldn't do the work anymore after what happened with Mom, that it had broken something in her, but she was glad she'd been able to help, glad the truth had come out. I never spoke to Vanessa again. She sent 1 letter from prison, claiming she'd been desperate, that she had debts I didn't know about, that she'd made a mistake. She asked for forgiveness. I didn't respond. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive. A year after Mom's death, I was sitting on her porch, the same porch where we'd spent so many evenings talking, when I realized something. The people Mom had trusted most to witness her final days, the nurses who were paid to care for strangers, had shown more integrity and love than her own daughter. Catherine and Bethany had risked nothing by staying silent. They'd gained nothing by speaking up. But they'd done it anyway because it was right, because Mom had deserved better, because truth mattered more than convenience. I still teach history. I still live in Mom's house. Sometimes students ask me why I became a teacher instead of pursuing something more lucrative. I tell them the same thing Mom used to tell me, that the most important things in life aren't the ones that make you rich, they're the ones that make you good. That showing up matters more than showing off. That being there when it's hard matters more than being there when it's easy. Vanessa never understood that. She never understood that Mom's love wasn't something to be earned through manipulation or bought through fake sacrifice. It was something freely given to the child who simply showed up day after day and cared. I won the inheritance, but that's not what mattered. What mattered was that 2 nurses who barely knew my mother loved her enough to fight for the truth when her own daughter wouldn't. What mattered was that in a courtroom on a Thursday in November, justice found its way in through an unexpected door. What mattered was that my mother's final wish, spoken to strangers in the middle of the night, was finally heard. If you made it this far, hit like, you've earned it.